Chapter 3. In my years in the palace, visitors who observed King Solomon from a distance would sometimes query me concerning the grandeur of his kingdom, the elegance of his possessions, the depth of his wisdom, the weight of his gold. To all such questions I had one reply. The Solomon I knew was veiled by the glare of his wealth. Hidden behind his outward adornments was a man of obsessive compassion who once ordered an entire royal caravan to pause in the road so he could lighten a peasant girl's burden by showing her how she could better balance her load. Reflections of the Shulamite. Young Solomon, 14 and tall, gazed out over the parapet, the city of Pharaoh stretching dazzlingly before him. Yet his eyes were unseeing. The depths of the naivete of Hava, his presumptive queen-to-be, had become painfully apparent in this faraway land, much more than among the friendly and forgiving residents of the royal house in Jerusalem. Is she truly that unaware? Time and again, the question haunted him as he observed her behavior among the young men of other lands. Hava, to be charitable, was innocent, perhaps even sheltered. But when among new acquaintances, it did seem that she enjoyed the lavish attention more than necessary, especially attentions from those who, it was clear to Solomon, had more than just a friendly interest in the sparkling young Israelite princess. He tried to imagine defenses for her behavior. She was raised without a mother to train her. Unfortunately, his gift of wisdom was not so easily persuaded. His own mother, Bathsheba, had invested a great deal of time and effort into Hava. To be honest, her challenge was perhaps greater than that of other young maidens. She was queen apparent, for one thing, a fact which always attracted attention. But beyond that, she possessed a personality that won her quick favor in any group. She was witty, articulate, entertaining, bubbling, infectious, talented. These all were words whispered among those newly introduced to her. She was not long in any social setting without soon finding herself the center of attention. And from her perspective, what was wrong with that? She was doing no harm, simply spreading joy and happiness around. Still, he thought, there ought to come a time for her to pull away from the crowds and let her loyalty to me be seen publicly. Solomon had found such occasions few, to be kind, and missing altogether, to be honest. Moments before, Hava had just bustled by alongside a dazzling young Egyptian prince. The pair had been seen together quite regularly over the past several days. And so the young Solomon stood alone, looking out over the city. With what lofty matters is the future king at this moment so occupied? Solomon lurched in surprise at the sound of a mature and dignified voice and turned to see Naamah, the Ammonite princess, who had come up behind him unnoticed. She stood dark, silent, and motionless, her deep eyes regarding him with patient stillness, allowing her question to hang in the air, her eyes not moving from him. "You speak Hebrew," Solomon observed. "Yes." "You are not Egyptian," he noted. "No." Naamah returned Solomon's gaze with still confidence, apparently unafraid of prolonged silence. "You are observant for an Israelite." Solomon's eyebrows went up in surprise. "What did you say?" Naamah tilted her head to the side slightly and shrugged one shoulder, a thin trace of a smile touching her full Arab lips. "I am an Ammonitess. I have lived among Israelites my entire life, and I have noticed a distinct lack of curiosity among your people." Solomon smiled. "You are observant for an Ammonitess." Naamah merely nodded slowly and smiled back with her eyes. Solomon explained, "My parents are Israelite, but I've been raised to understand the world beyond just Israel." Naamah nodded again. "So how is it that the future king of Israel can be exposed to such pollution when its people cannot?" Solomon chuckled at the princess's forthrightness. Taking a friendly tone, he explained, "Your candor is refreshing, and your question is fair. You desire to reconcile your understanding that we Israelites do not mix with foreigners with the fact that I am educated in their ways. Your understanding is accurate, but incomplete. Since you know my tongue, perhaps you know something of my God as well. The history of my nation reveals a God who chooses whom he will. Though as sons of Jacob, we are carriers of a unique promise. There's no lack of examples of our God choosing non-Israelites for important works. Israelites are not his only interest, for he is the God of all. His children are everywhere. Perhaps you've heard of the great warrior Caleb. He was not an Israelite. As the future king, I represent the God of Israel, not because I am Israelite, but because God has chosen me, just as he chose my father's great-grandmother, Ruth." Solomon paused for effect. The Moabitess. Now it was Naamah's turn to be surprised. In characteristic fashion, Solomon had turned the irony back on his conversation partner. Naamah showed her surprise with quiet dignity, cocking her head slightly to one side while a single eyebrow rose. "Moabite," she repeated thoughtfully. "You are aware that Moab is a sister nation to Ammon. Both Moab and Ammon were descendants of Lot." "Yes, I know." "So, if your God could choose for his servant a Moabite wife, certainly an Ammonite wife would not be out of the question." Solomon opened his mouth, then hesitated. She had deftly met his irony and upped it with a clever counter of her own. From whence did this girl come, suddenly emerging from the shadows as she had to entice him into an interesting conversation? If you could call her a girl, for she was suddenly looking and sounding very much like a woman. "Your tongue is adventurous, Ammonitis." "So I've been told. My father says I was born with a tongue of salt. He beats me because he cannot answer me." Solomon blew out a chuckle that was part amusement, part curiosity. "Truly? What do you tell him that he cannot answer?" "I tell him that men and women are equal." Solomon felt his lips stretching into a slight smile. "On what do you base this conclusion?" "I contend that, given the same opportunity, there is not an endeavor on earth wherein a woman cannot be found who can equal or best a man." "True enough," Solomon said, nodding as if in thought. For the first time, the Ammonitess's eyes brightened, just a touch. She carefully examined his face. She had thus far not found a man capable of admitting what she had just heard him confess. "You agree with me?" "Indeed." She stared at him as if she had discovered the lost treasures of Amenhotep. "So, why then are not men and women regarded equally?" "Because they're not equal." The words hit her like a brick. She blinked. "Not How can you reconcile that with what you've just admitted?" He looked at her kindly, noticed a red tinge behind her dark complexion, and took a gentle tone. "I would call to witness the whole world, my Ammonitis friend. It is no less than the sum of all of its inhabitants. If men and women were equal in all ways, he paused for effect, then they would be equal in all things, he concluded, letting his palms open in a shrug. Her mouth dropped open and she inhaled as if to say something, but hesitated, her salty tongue finding no instant reply. Add to that the puzzling question of why one exact equal would be in need of special treatment from another, he added, preempting the reply she was just beginning to locate. She glared at him for several pensive moments, then huffed and looked away sharply. He waited. Turning back to him, she declared, "I cannot accept that women are inferior," fire burning deeply in her eyes. Inferior? Unequal and inferior are two different things, friend. Is the moon inferior to the sun? In brightness, yes, but in beauty, no. Is the river inferior to the sea? In size, yes, but in speed, no. These are all unequal, but neither is inferior, and I, for one, am glad for it. Are not some inequalities required to form harmonies? Without harmonies, the world would have no music. So it is with men and women. If they were equal, it would spoil the song. She was eyeing him suspiciously. He tossed her a wink. But in the case of you and your father, if you were considered equals, I suspect the compliment would be more his than yours, he added. She blinked as the clever flattery in the comment found its target. If a rebuttal was in order, it was now time to speak it, but Naima was suddenly not so sure if his comments truly insulted her gender. Her adventurous tongue remained restless but silent, unable to find a barb that would penetrate his surprising volley. If there were a deserving target for one hit, and of that she was suddenly not sure. How had he so quickly scattered her arguments on her favorite topic into such a puzzling array of ambiguities? She did not know, but of this she was quickly becoming aware. The young Israelite king-to-be was not the ignorant, pampered child of privilege she had assumed. He was dangerously clever, but tempered it with a disarming kindness and displayed none of the acidity that she had come to expect from men when forced to address the current subject. Solomon regarded with curious intrigue the bold young Ammonitess who stood before him with her shiny, black Arab hair and dark, intelligent eyes. She was manifestly clever of mind, but misinformed, especially about the God of Israel, which was a topic more interesting to him than the last. Their short conversation had already proven her a worthwhile conversationalist. Naima. Solomon spoke her name for the first time, revealing that he did remember it, though they had not been officially introduced. Her head snapped up at the sound of her name. You have implied something about our God. Could one of our people take an Ammonite wife, as my great-grandfather married Ruth? This is a fair question. Our God is not exclusive, as you perhaps suppose. He is sovereign, something different entirely. He chooses whom he wishes, and if he approves, who can resist his will? But in your case, the objection would come from your God. I don't think Milcom would approve. At the mention of the Ammonite deity, Naima stiffened, a cloud of fear passing briefly over her face. She recovered quickly. I was not asking to be your wife. My place in my own kingdom is not in doubt, I assure you. I doubt not your place. It is your kingdom that gives me cause for question, Solomon said. Naima did not have an instant response to that. He added, Besides that, I've already been promised a wife. So I see. Is her behavior typical of Israelite wives? she added, indicating with a tilt of her head the direction in which Hava had recently walked. The backs of Solomon's ears suddenly felt hot. Turnabout is fair play. He had no graceful answer to her astute and well-put question. Naamah rescued him from the uncomfortable moment by gracefully moving from the position where she had been standing to lean on the rail next to him, casting her gaze out over the city. "Why do you doubt my kingdom?" "My father wears its crown," he replied. "Why do you doubt my wife?" "Isn't it obvious?" She looked knowingly into Solomon's face. It was impossible for him to hide his blush. He discerned that to attempt an explanation would only worsen his state. He was suddenly wary of her. Their short conversation had already revealed that she possessed a clever intellect. He also noticed that she had an exotic kind of beauty and seemed older than her years. "Let me tell you something about my kingdom that you may not know," Naamah offered suddenly, casting her dark eyes back out over the sparkling city, her long black hair swinging from the quick movement. "The throne and the crown of Ammon do not belong to the king of Ammon. They belong to our god, Milcom. Sometimes there is a man to represent him on the earth. Other times, as is the case now, there's not. In either case, my place in his kingdom is secure, for I'm betrothed either to the king, if he lives, or to Milcom himself in the eternal kingdom. If I do not marry the one, I will marry the other, which would be superior by far." Solomon chuckled. "And just how do you propose to marry Milcom?" Her expression grew grave, accompanied by an unexpected silence. "There is a ceremony on the morning of the spring equinox of my 18th year, at first like—" The shocking realization descended upon Solomon like a dark cloud. Human sacrifice being entirely foreign in Israel, he had not been thinking along such lines at all. He paused for a moment, trying to discern how one might be expected to respond to such a revelation. Were congratulations or apologies in order? "Is there any means by which you might avoid this wedding?" "There are two ways. I could be disqualified if I were found to not be a virgin." "And then?" "I would be immediately burned alive with fire, and in the afterlife, I would be the object of Milcom's eternal rage, rather than his wife." "And what is the other way?" "As I said, I could be married to the earthly king of Ammon." "But Ammon has no king." "I see," she responded in a tone that showed her mind had lit up with an irony. "Well, I'm afraid I must disagree with you, Israelite, and I appeal to your own words for testimony. Did you not yourself say that at this time the crown of Ammon is worn by your father, David?" Solomon stopped short. She had a point. Technically, his father, David, had become the king of Ammon after defeating and annexing it, since no vassal ruler was installed. A moment later, the implication of it hit him also. "My father is old. He's not taking wives," Solomon said. "Besides that, you cannot be both the queen of Milcom and the queen of Israel." "Why not?" she asked, leaning forward. Solomon shook his head. "You would not understand. It's not done in Israel." "Sovereignty again, I suppose." "No, not exactly, and the explanation may take longer than your patience can bear. But in Israel, there are no marriages to the gods." "Well then, perhaps a king could be restored to Ammon," she suggested, her reasonable answer tinted with a hint of desperation. Solomon pondered this suggestion for a moment while Naamah waited. He was finding himself truly interested in the conversation. He was discerning within her a well-concealed desperation. This was not merely recreational banter for the young princess, for a dark and terrifying cloud hung over her future, forcing upon her mind a singular kind of focus that only someone in her position could understand. When he did not respond, she put words to the question that was rising in her mind. Do you not agree that we who have made our home in this land for centuries deserve our own state? Solomon shook his head again. You do not understand. It is not in the power of Israelite kings to bestow land as though it were their rightful possession. The land belongs to Jehovah. We are simply the caretakers of it. But it certainly seemed in your father's power to take the land. You misunderstand, Solomon said. My father could take no land that the Lord had not already appointed to him, and this had already been ordained centuries ago. Now it was Naamah's turn to pause in thought. When she finally did respond, her tone was resolute. You insult me. You claim I do not understand, but I understand better than you know, for in your own scriptures the story is told. I understand who the land belonged to from the first, and now you occupy it by force. And now you presume to vilify our religion when it was your own nation that set up the tradition of human sacrifice that we now follow? Do not deny it. Solomon blinked, aghast. 1,000 undeserved pardons, my dear friend, but your meaning escapes me. What human sacrifice? Do not toy with me. We know your history, though you think us ignorant. The story is told often. How Jephthah invaded and overcame us, though we were living peacefully as a neighbor to Israel, in what for centuries was our rightful territory. After Jephthah brutally butchered our fathers, he sacrificed his own daughter to your God. So it has been with selected virgin daughters of Ammon ever since. You are to thank for my fate, Israelite. Her voice was even, but a reddish tinge in her cheeks revealed barely controlled anger. Solomon could not believe what he was hearing. He knew that other nations had a less than perfect understanding of the God of Israel, but he had no idea the misinformation extended this far. He regarded the woman before him with a new compassion. She continued to remain there, motionless, her deep breathing the only evidence of her boiling emotions. She would add nothing more. Solomon sighed and rubbed his neck, his eyes wandering into the distance. There were so many errors in her accusation, all deeply wrapped in hot emotion. Deeply felt errors were the most difficult kind to correct. The situation demanded a most wise and careful response. Naamah, Solomon said finally in a tone that returned none of the anger of her accusation, while turning to look at her with compassion. His voice projected such paternal resonance that the woman looked up at him in surprise that it could emanate from such a young face. Naamah, he said one more time, kindly allow me to show you something. Tell me, do you like my garment? Your garment? He held out his arms for her to see. My garment. It is of the finest materials, exquisitely woven of one piece, custom made for me. Is it not fine? Yes, but why do you ask me this? Look at this, he said, pulling back a fold to reveal a nasty rip where the fabric was soiled. She frowned and peered at the spot. How shameful. How did this happen? I took a fall, and now what is otherwise a fine garment is spoiled by this damage. But it's just a garment. I have others. But you, Nema, I like this garment. There are things that a person of your intelligence deserves to understand, but you have been badly served by a version of history that is not accurate. The lie rests unbecoming upon someone so keen of mind, as this tear is unbecoming upon a fine garment such as this. Yet the situation need not remain so. I would very much like if you would be so kind as to allow me to present to you my version. There is nothing in the worship of the God of Israel that would ever subject you to the cruelty of human sacrifice. The words of Solomon descended with such kindness that the very atmosphere around them seemed to change. Nema felt it instantly, a sudden transformation, surreal and almost magical, covering her like a warm blanket, and was struck with a compulsion to hear his explanation, even if she was skeptical. She stared, awestruck, at the young prince, feeling his warm eyes penetrate almost down to her soul. He had revealed a depth and compassion unexpected, fully incongruous with a person she had assumed was a privileged, pampered future king. While she hesitated, spellbound by the warmth of his entreaty, Solomon spoke again. Come, it draws cold out here. Let us go in. There is a warm drink prepared in Israel which friends share. If you will allow me the honor, I will prepare one for you, and we can speak about these things. Nema was sure she had never been spoken to so kindly in her entire life, and could find nothing in her considerable arsenal of rhetorical skills to counter such abject courtesy. He had neutralized, in an instant, all the passion of the debate, extinguishing it in the honey of pure kindness. She was mesmerized, feeling a lump forming in her throat. She nodded yes, not trusting her voice. Solomon's perception detected her emotion, but his kindness left it unnoted.